In a stunning moment for the national debate over firearms, the Supreme Court of the United States has issued a unanimous 9-0 ruling that is rippling across the legal, political, and cultural landscape of America. For gun owners, manufacturers, lawmakers, and advocates on both sides of the Second Amendment divide, this decision is more than just another headline. It represents a legal anchor point, a moment that reinforces the balance between constitutional rights and federal accountability. Today, we break down what happened, why it matters, and how it could influence gun policy for years to come. Using only verified facts and publicly reported details, with no speculation, no exaggeration, and no misinformation, the decision at the center of this moment came in the case Smith & Wesson Brands, Inc. v. Estados Unidos Mexicanos, a lawsuit that drew global attention. When a foreign government attempted to hold American firearm manufacturers legally responsible for cartel-related violence beyond U.S. borders, the lawsuit argued that gun makers knowingly allowed products to enter illegal markets and therefore should be financially and legally liable for deaths and crimes committed with those weapons in another country. For many activists, this case represented an opportunity to reshape the gun industry by opening the door to large-scale civil liability. But the Supreme Court, in an extremely rare display of full unity across ideological lines, rejected that premise. 9 justices, with no dissent, concluded that the lawsuit could not proceed under U.S. law. To understand the weight of a unanimous ruling, one must understand how divided the Supreme Court often is. Contentious issues, especially those involving firearms, frequently produce split decisions, 6-3s, 5-4s, ideological fractures down predictable lines. A 9-0 outcome sends an unmistakable message. The legal principles involved were not ambiguous, not interpretive, but structurally firm. The court pointed directly to the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, a federal statute that shields firearm manufacturers and sellers from being held liable for crimes committed with their products as long as those products were sold legally. The justices reaffirmed that American manufacturers cannot be sued for the unlawful actions of criminals, especially criminals, operating in a foreign jurisdiction. This ruling did not expand gun rights in the way cases like District of Columbia v. Heller or NYSRPA v. Brune did. Rather, it reinforced the framework that already exists, strengthening the legal shield around gun commerce and clarifying the limits of civil liability. It effectively shut down the strategy of targeting the gun industry through international litigation and set a legal tone likely to influence future attempts at similar lawsuits. The court did not weigh in on whether gun laws should be stricter or looser. It simply made clear that courts are not the avenue for regulating lawful gun manufacturers in this way. Lawmakers, not justices, hold that power. The historical foundation behind this decision stretches back decades. In 2008, the Heller ruling recognized an individual right to possess firearms for self-defense within the home, rejecting the idea that the Second Amendment applied only to organized militias. 2 years later, McDonald v. Chicago extended this protection nationwide, restricting states and municipalities from enacting laws that violate the core right to bear arms. In 2022, with Brune, the court ruled that any modern firearm regulation must be consistent with the country's historical tradition of gun regulation, a standard that dramatically shifted how courts evaluate gun laws. The new 9-0 ruling does not rewrite the Second Amendment, but it operates in the same constitutional ecosystem, one where firearm rights are recognized as individual, historically grounded, and legally protected for gun owners in the United States. This decision may feel like a reinforcement of stability, the continued confirmation that legal acquisition and ownership remain protected under federal law. The ruling does not expand the right to carry, purchase, or own a firearm, but it does send a message that lawful gun commerce cannot be undermined through liability claims targeting the industry itself. For manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, the outcome is monumental. Without PLCAA protections, Companies could be bankrupted by lawsuits claiming responsibility for the criminal actions of third parties. A single lawsuit with an emotional narrative could collapse even the largest supplier. The Supreme Court's resolution of this case reaffirms that lawful businesses cannot be held liable for unlawful violence they did not commit, enable, or intend, a key distinction in American liability law. The global implications are just as significant. If the court had allowed the lawsuit to move forward, foreign governments and domestic activists could have attempted to reshape U.S. gun laws through civil litigation rather than through Congress. Instead, the ruling almost guarantees that the battleground will remain where the Constitution places it, in the hands of legislators. Gun control advocacy groups may now shift their focus back toward lobbying, policy proposals, state-level restrictions, magazine regulations, age limit adjustments, or background check expansions. Meanwhile, gun rights advocates may use this ruling as momentum to challenge restrictive laws in states like California, New York, Illinois, and Massachusetts, arguing that the judicial branch continues to support lawful possession and manufacturing. The ruling also reinforces an important philosophical question that sits at the center of the gun debate. Where does responsibility truly lie? The court's decision suggests that responsibility for crime belongs to criminals, not to those who manufacture the tools they misuse. Critics argue this approach ignores the reality of trafficking routes and loopholes, while supporters say it prevents emotional policy from overriding constitutional rights. This tension, accountability versus liberty, continues to define America's political divide. The Supreme Court has not ended that debate. It has merely clarified the rules of engagement. As the dust settles, both sides are preparing for the next phase. Legislators who favor strict gun control may accelerate new bills at the federal or state level, while Second Amendment supporters will likely point to this ruling as evidence that the judiciary is not aligned with aggressive firearm regulation strategies. News outlets, advocacy groups, and political voices across the spectrum are analyzing the decision and its implications. And everyday Americans, the hunters, the self-defense owners, the collectors, the sports shooters, the constitutional purists, and even those who simply want their communities to feel safe, are watching closely. Whether you support or oppose firearms, this decision shapes the environment you live in. So here is where Chapter 1 concludes. A unanimous Supreme Court ruling has rejected foreign attempts to hold American gunmakers civilly responsible for criminal violence beyond U.S. borders, reinforced long-standing federal protections under PLCAA, and signaled that future battles over firearms will occur in legislatures and state houses rather than in liability courts. This moment does not end the national debate, it resets it. It tells America where the boundaries are, who holds the power, and how the next fight will be fought. As the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling begins to settle into the national consciousness, the question that now dominates the conversation is simple: what happens next? A 9-0 decision is not just a legal event, it becomes a political catalyst, a strategic recalibration point, and in many cases, the beginning of a broader chain reaction. While the court has closed the door on civil liability lawsuits targeting lawful gun manufacturers for crimes committed by third parties, especially crimes occurring outside U.S. borders, it has opened a far more complex door, one involving state governments, federal agencies, congressional battles, and public opinion shifts that will unfold in the coming months and years. To understand the future impact of this ruling, we need to examine the 5 major arenas where this decision will likely shape the next phase of America's gun law landscape: state legislatures, federal rulemaking, judicial challenges to restrictive laws, political campaigns, and public perception. Almost immediately after the ruling, legal experts began debating how aggressively individual states might respond. Many states on the restrictive side of the firearm spectrum, particularly New York, California, New Jersey, Illinois, Massachusetts, and a handful of others, have historically used civil liability theories as part of their legislative strategy against gun manufacturers. Even though the Supreme Court has now clarified the limits of those attempts, States may still try to find creative pathways around the federal barrier by enacting state-specific regulations designed to shape industry behavior indirectly. While they cannot impose liability for criminal misuse, they may increase compliance requirements, shipping restrictions, reporting obligations, or manufacturer-specific oversight rules. Some states may argue that these changes are regulatory, not liability-based, hoping to avoid conflict with federal law. Whether these state-level strategies survive future court challenges remains unclear, but they are almost guaranteed to emerge. In fact, political leaders in restrictive states have already signaled that they intend to respond legislatively. Whenever federal protections such as PLCAA prevent them from targeting the industry through traditional liability avenues, on the other hand, states that prioritize firearm rights, Arizona, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, and others may react by solidifying their protections for manufacturers and retailers within their borders. We may see more states expand preemption laws, which prevent local governments from passing their own firearm rules. Other states might adopt firearm industry protection acts that strengthen the legal shield beyond what federal law already provides. Governors in Pro-2A states may use the Supreme Court decision as political fuel to promote firearm-friendly policies during legislative sessions, framing their actions as aligning with the highest court in the nation. The ruling essentially provides constitutional cover for these states to defend lawful commerce in firearms and to resist aggressive regulatory attempts at the local level. The divide between gun-friendly and gun-restrictive states is likely to widen as each side uses the Supreme Court ruling to justify its respective vision, one side aiming to shield the industry, the other seeking new angles for regulation. At the federal level, executive agencies such as the ATF will also feel the ripple effect. While the Supreme Court decision does not directly restrict the ATF's enforcement capabilities or authority, it does reinforce the principle that lawful gun commerce cannot be targeted on the basis of unlawful actions committed by third parties. This principle may indirectly influence ongoing and future debates surrounding federal rulemaking, particularly proposed rules involving classifications of components, reporting requirements, or the definitions surrounding firearms and accessories. Because courts have been increasingly skeptical of aggressive administrative interpretations that expand regulatory power beyond statutory limits, agencies may approach future rulemaking with greater caution. In the wake of this decision, courts reviewing federal rules may lean more heavily on the distinction between lawful commerce and criminal misuse, a distinction that underpins the Supreme Court's reasoning. This doesn't mean agencies will stop proposing new rules. It simply means they may face more robust judicial scrutiny when they do. Meanwhile, the ruling may energize constitutional litigation efforts across the country. In recent years, numerous challenges to state-level firearm restrictions have been filed, many of them invoking the historical tradition standard established in the Brune decision. The new ruling does not alter the Brune standard, but it contributes momentum to the broader judicial trend of reaffirming that lawful gun ownership and lawful gun commerce carry constitutional weight. Lawyers challenging restrictive state laws, whether those laws involve magazine limits, assault-style rifle bans, carry permit requirements, or sensitive place designations may cite the 9-0 ruling as evidence that the court is not aligned with strategies that indirectly pressure or restrict lawful industry operations. While every case is fact-specific, the unanimous opinion adds strength to arguments that courts must remain within constitutional boundaries, resisting policy-driven rulings that target the lawful act of manufacturing or selling firearms. This could have a meaningful influence on pending cases in the lower courts, many of which will ultimately advance toward appellate courts and perhaps the Supreme Court itself in future terms. Politically, the ruling injects new momentum into national campaigns on both sides of the debate. Election seasons magnify every legal decision, and this one arrives at a moment when gun policy is one of the most polarized issues in America. For candidates who champion the Second Amendment, the ruling becomes a rallying point, a symbol of judicial clarity, and a tool to energize supporters. Many will argue that the Supreme Court's unanimity demonstrates The strength of constitutional principles surrounding lawful firearms commerce. For gun control-focused candidates, the ruling may be framed as a call to action. A reminder that legislative solutions, not courts, must address concerns related to trafficking, cross-border violence, and community safety. Expect political messaging on both sides to intensify, with each interpreting the ruling in a way that aligns with its platform and voter base. The unique aspect here is that both sides can claim something from the ruling. Gun rights advocates will say the court affirmed the industry's legal protections, while gun control advocates will argue that only legislative action can produce meaningful change. As this political climate evolves, ordinary Americans, regardless of where they fall in the debate, will continue to absorb the implications of the ruling. For gun owners, the decision offers a sense of assurance that lawful commerce and lawful possession remain recognized by the court as distinct from criminal acts. It reinforces the foundational idea that responsible ownership is not equivalent to criminal misuse. For individuals who support stricter gun regulations, the ruling may be frustrating or concerning, but it also clarifies the path forward. Activism, legislative engagement, community-based initiatives, and political advocacy will remain the primary tools for influencing policy. Whether one agrees with the ruling or not, its clarity forces the national conversation to shift toward transparent debate, rather than legal pressure placed on an industry through liability tactics. Looking ahead, legal scholars predict that the ruling will influence legislative drafting as well. Lawmakers may now approach gun-related proposals with greater attention to constitutional limits, recognizing that courts will not favor indirect attempts to restrict firearm-related commerce. The ruling essentially draws a bright line. Lawful manufacturers cannot be blamed for unlawful acts committed by unrelated individuals. This principle may shape how future bills are structured, requiring lawmakers to focus on conduct, not commerce, when addressing issues related to violence, trafficking, and criminal misuse. Whether Congress chooses to revisit federal law, tighten certain regulations, or leave the issue to states remains uncertain. But the ruling will undoubtedly shape the political calculations surrounding any firearm-related bill. Ultimately, this chapter in American gun law is a reminder of how complex and layered the issue truly is. The Supreme Court's unanimous ruling does not settle the debate, nor does it attempt to. Instead, it establishes legal parameters, reaffirming constitutional and statutory boundaries within which the nation must navigate its next steps. Every actor, states, federal agencies, courts, lawmakers, advocacy groups, and everyday citizens will respond differently. But what is clear is that this ruling serves as a pivot point. It closes one path, opens others, and forces the country to confront the issue not through the courtroom strategies of liability, but through direct, open, democratic debate.